friends, and welcome to the Future of Gaming, very special GDC edition. We've got Brian, we got Seb, and yeah, we're recording this with a beautiful San Francisco background to give you a bit of an update of our adventures in the city at GDC. Before we kick off, some intros. I'm Nico. You probably know me if you listen to this. We have Sebastian. Have you been on the Future of Gaming before?
Yeah, once or twice, but I'm Sebastian. I'm a venture partner at Bitcraft. I focus on the intersection of consumer and gaming, and I'm the co-founder of Infinite Canvas, which is a user-generated studio publisher on platforms like Roblox, Fortnite Creative, and other places.
Amazing.
You? Yeah, I've never been on this podcast. Thanks for having me.
Welcome, man.
I'm Brian, and I am a VP of product at Pocket Gems. We're a mobile game studio here in San Francisco, founded in 2009. Made Episode. You've probably heard of it. War Dragons. I've done everything from sort of prototyping, concepting, launching. Happy to be here.
All right, let's talk about it. So GDC, your first take.
Yeah. I was telling you this when we were coming up upstairs, which I feel like the vibe that I get coming out of GDC is like we're on the precipice of a lot of things sort of unfolding over the next few years. Sort of, talk to people about generative AI and how it's going to be integrated in all of the workflows and all of like our daily lives and professional lives. And then obviously all of the Web3 stuff is still going, but everyone's sort of like waiting to see if we can actually make something interesting out of it. Lots of traditional game companies, you guys would know more about that, that have gotten funding in the last few years. We're starting to actually play some of the demos, games are coming out. And all of this is sort of in light of like the overall macroeconomic backdrop. So I'm just sort of, I don't know, that's the sense I get. I'm like, I kind of want to see what's going to happen over the next few years. I think a lot of things are going to change. Mm-hmm. How about you guys?
I mean, it's interesting because it's certainly a very different vibe than last year. Last year was far more announcement of announcements. It was like, hey, we're going to announce that we're going to announce something in the next few months. Whereas I feel this year was a lot of actually hands-on demos and being able to see it, which is both exciting and disappointing. I've certainly played my share of games where I was incredibly excited about what they were building, and some that was like, what were you guys doing the last 12 months burning all this money? Were you guys working on anything of importance? I do think it's a sea change for sure. It's going to be interesting to see where we go from here. It feels very much like the first time we transitioned into mobile. Mobile was this like outsider looking in and trying to break into the hegemony of PC and console. And that was what felt like probably a decade, maybe 12, 13 years ago now.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's that change again.
So I spent 20 minutes on the floor in the expo hall, and it felt like I was at NFT NYC.
Really?
Because it was just crypto everywhere, like Avalanche and
you do have to book your booth and pay for it in advance, like really early.
Okay, so again, a non-refundable deposits.
Exactly.
Just like NFT NYC.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, yeah. NFT NYC, there was a mythical party that must have cost $2 to $3 million, and it was just after Terra and Luna. So yeah, it was mixed feelings at that event.
Yeah, I was curious because I didn't go to the expo this year, but I remember last year, like there's so much crypto presence also, and there was like a backlash of a lot of people at GDC. Like, did it feel like that still? Like,
hard to say for me. It seems like so the general public's excitement around blockchain and games feels like it's often correlated with the price of Bitcoin. So, as the price goes up, people are like, oh my God, I can start earning money by playing these games and everything's going up and I can buy gaming NFTs and the price goes up. This is amazing. And then when the price goes down, everything follows and people are not that excited anymore. But for builders, actual developers, it seems like it's actually the inverse. Where if everything's going well, if it's a crypto bull market and you decide, or you announce that you're going to be using Web3, everyone's like, they're just chasing Web3, they're jumping on the hype train, just looking to make some quick money or easily fundraise. While if today you're announcing that you're going to be using Web3, it's clear that it's because you believe in the technology.
Or, hear me out,
okay.
some large companies have really long decision cycles. So they're just getting around to announcing and making decisions based on information from 2021.
Yeah, it's like you booked your booth for GDC.
Yeah, exactly. You're good to go.
Yeah.
I haven't had the luxury or the ability to go on the expo floor, I do think that this GDC, to Brian's point, had a volume of announcements of like exciting things I haven't seen in years. Like even last year with Web3, there just wasn't the announcement of CS2, the Unreal announcements. There's
one.
yeah, like that was I think super cool. And even on the Web3 side, we finally start seeing the better game developers and the better people who are making game loops that aren't MMOs. 12 months is about the amount of time you need to start having good sense of what the game looks like, and so that's been a lot of fun to see. But it is the thing that was really jarring to me on the expo floor, or not the expo floor, but the hotel lobby playtest was just people seem to be really obsessed with fidelity in a way that is just not going to work for them. And what I mean by this is CS2 announced. CS2 is based on Source 2. Source 2 is from 2012. So basically every computer, that's one way to look at it, but every computer can run Source 2 at this point in the world, right? And so CS2 is going to be playable across the entire globe. Some of these demos I saw that were built on the most recent version of Unreal 5 will now run on my 3080. And we need like a 4090 to be able to run these things. And it's fine for the demo. It's fine for them showcasing it. But I am probably a power user. And there's no way my computer's going to be able to run it properly. How the absolute hell are they going to be able to mass market any of these games? Like, is that even the intent? Are you just trying to do as a tech demo? Like, what's the point of having effectively John Wick 4 levels of graphical fidelity if it only runs on your specific 4090?
You're seeing that across like all
the
Web3
games,
even Web3 games too, or
mostly Web3 games.
Mostly Web3 games.
Like that I saw a lot of the games in general across the board. I saw that way. It's super weird.
It is interesting and weird. And I'll just throw one example out that's contrasting your points. I've been looking at a company called Zula. Shout out to Ilker. He was there at the FOGDAO. He's also part of the FOGDAO, and his game he's built a first-person shooter game that is specifically built for like the lowest of low-end devices, and he's been killing it. Like he has like I think 1 million MAUs or something, or
That's a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Nice.
It's doing well, and so yeah, it seems like, and I haven't seen a lot of companies do this, focusing on the lower end devices to tackle emerging markets. I underestimated, so I always thought that. Again, like Counter-Strike was already, as you said, right, based on the Source engine that's already like a decade old, and was already like the 80% of computers or like 90% of computers could run it.
Yep.
But apparently there seems to be big demand for things that are like even more accessible.
Oh yeah, especially as depends on like what metrics you're trying to hit. If you're trying to do ARCDAO as a combination of DAO metrics, then like there's a lot to unpack there. But certainly it's really cool to see games of both spectrums, I suppose. And I think to Brian's point again on the sea change, we're seeing that start to come up. And that's really weird because it makes sense for Web3 games, right? If you only have 10,000 MAU and they all have 4090s and you're only targeting...
They're mining cryptocurrency anyway.
Yeah. So might as well build games for that audience that are like already working on their stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas last year, I think there was a lot more of a, hey, this is going to be accessible to everyone. Let's be more generalized. That's the idea. So that's been a little bit weird that way to watch.
Another reason why I kind of disagree with that strategy is, first of all, like it feels like still most of the games, or almost all of these games that are using these insane graphics are still saying like, oh, we're building AAA style games or quality games for the mass audience because we're going to be the one that brings the first 100 million into this Web3 gaming space. And in addition, like, I spent probably, half of my waking time thinking about what Web3 brings to games, and graphical fidelity is almost never like a part of that. It's like I'm thinking about it should be unique experiences like gameplay. You should be able to do like multiple things with your NFTs or fungible tokens. It should be maybe an open economy. There's a bunch of different ways this can work, but putting so much time and effort into optimizing for graphical fidelity feels like you're fighting the wrong battle.
Yeah, I think people are doing it partly because there's this whole thesis that's unproven so far, which is if we just make a good game in Web3, then people will come in. And I think maybe incorrectly some people at least associate graphical fidelity with good game or whatever. So it's a bet. We'll see.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, even the non-Web3 games, there's a bunch of super high graphical fidelity stuff that people are working on, right? Because a lot of, like, X-Rai and X-Blizzard teams, like, they're trying to make AAA games, AAA RTS, whatever it is. Like, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it the same issues? Like, those also have some problems, right? Like, Web3 aside.
Yeah, it's interesting. The best reason to use Unreal 5's max specs, in my opinion, is if you think you're going to have a 10-year dev cycle. Because then, like, you could start now, and by 2032, 2033, like, hopefully computers will have caught up, right? Like, maybe that's the argument. I'm really biased, right? I actually don't believe generally in the AAA thesis that most people approach it with, unless they're specific Korean or Chinese companies that do those, like, 100-hour work weeks. Like, yeah, like, those guys, like, they kill it at that. And like, I heard one company tell me that they have figured out an optimization where they get stuff done in 4 years instead of 6. And I was like, is the solution working 120 hours instead of 80 hours a week?
Yeah.
And the answer was yes, right? And so, like, we do see that delta at times. I don't know, other than, especially in times of uncertainty, you want to put your best foot forward. And one way to do that is, like, you can, like, build a really cool looking demo. You can create something that's going, like, make people's, like, mouths drop, right? We saw this on Roblox. Roblox has been pushing and doing a lot of press around this, like, cool FPS on their platform. That FPS doesn't work on mobile very well. Mobile is, like, more than 50% of their audience. But from a pure acquisition and interest level thing, they're like, wow, this engine can do blank. When in reality, a lot of people are like, well, yeah, it can only do blank on your computer. It can't really do blank on a 7-year-old iPhone. And what are we designing towards? I mean, I think one of the coolest things I remember about War Dragons, back when you guys were working on Pocket Gems, or I guess you're still working on it, was that it was, like, really pushing the upper limit of, like, mobile, 3D, of 3D on mobile, right? Like, but wasn't most of that just, like, an optimization problem at the time?
What you mean in terms of, like,
how to get on more devices like the Samsung Galaxy S3 and 5?
I mean, we were forced to, like, in order to actually market it, as quickly as possible. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So that was the hardest part, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, optimize, especially for Android, because, like, the sort of variety of devices, like, there's much higher end and the lower end is lower on Android. Right. So yeah, there's a ton of work.
What is you mentioned generative AI earlier?
Yeah.
What have you been seeing?
Buzzword. Oh.
Yeah. And what are you excited about? What are you critical about?
I don't know that I've seen anything specific to games that are using it, or that are pitching, okay, here's how we're going to use it in the game specifically. I think I definitely am seeing a lot of it in terms of, like, how can we be more productive, right? Just professionally. Like, we're actually using, like, our art director at Pocket Gems is using Midjourney for doing concepting for sort of, the next season of Dragons. And it, it doesn't replace concept art. Concept art is actually doing it, but it does sort of get you to 60%, 70% fidelity, like, very, very, very quickly, and at, like, a order of magnitude larger scale. So if you want to generate 1,000 different variations of a bunch of dragons that are samurai themed, you can send that into Midjourney and get all of those out in 5 minutes versus, like, asking somebody to draw them, and then you can have an artist take it to the final level to actually then be produced. So stuff like that. I think we're going to just see more and more of that.
That's dope. I've seen some companies pitching on not the expo floor, but the hotel floor. Like how, like, the real conference is just in all the different hotels. I've seen people pitch what effectively are, like, wrapper companies. Like, they're not actually building the core tech. The core tech is just, like, OpenAI. But they're like, they're just, like, GUIs on top of it, and they're pitching this idea to people. And it's been really interesting. Like, I've been really fortunate that I have some friends who have been in reinforcement learning and LLM for the last decade or so. And so I've had a good grounding in what this technology could be. But it's just really funny and sort of magical to see when people don't do this. This is what happened last year, right? With Web3, where it was like sufficiently advanced technology feels like magic, right? And so, like, last year, the magic was Web3. It's like, hey, we take these games with, like, low LTV and high CAC costs.
Magic.
And, like, we magic Web3 and then now is a workable $100 million game, right? And like this year, it feels a lot like in a similar vein. It's like, oh, like we take this idea that's like a tooling thing that most game companies and publishers are not going to pay for because everyone's cheap as hell, but we like wrap in magic, and now it's like a real tool that can be venture backed.
Mm.
I do think that like even if I mean I think that's not great, but I think there is like probably a ton of work and a ton of businesses just productizing like OpenAI. You know, I think that the wrapper company is like a real phenomenon. I think like even if OpenAI just stopped and was like static exactly where it was, like we could probably spend years just building products that actually like make it easy for people to use.
It's so awesome. I mean, we definitely use it in our game flow where we've replaced some QA people this way, where instead of having a PM or junior PM like listen to QA and then take notes and then like write cards for Jira, we now have Fireflies or Otter ingest, make transcripts and take the transcripts and put it into GPT-4 and be like, hey, print out 5 of the top things that are discussed to like be made into cards. It works really well.
Yeah, this reminds me. One of the things I was going to say. We were coming up here, we were chatting. We hadn't actually started recording yet, and I was thinking, like, there will be a moment in the future when the notion of like, oh, let's get together and then start recording the podcast, like that won't be a thing. It's just because everything will be recorded. And then you'll be like, okay, like have an AI go and like pull out the interesting things, like cut together a podcast for me, automatically. Like, certainly in the near future, every single sort of Google Meet or Zoom meeting you go to will be automatically transcribed and summarized by like that's definitely going to happen very soon.
Oh, I mean, it's already happening. There are definitely sometimes it's really nice to skip like a meeting. You see the transcript because you can get the response to the transcript in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
As opposed to spending an hour
like listening
sitting there.
Being like, what are people talking about? Yeah. What are they arguing about, Nico? What are they arguing about?
Dude, even without transcripts, like being able to put that at like 1.5 or 1.75 speed, life changer.
I mean, you also stretch during it. Right, also, you do CrossFit during meetings.
Wait, what?
Like he turns up his camera. It's like a big secret. No one knows about this, but now
they do.
Now they know.
You know what I actually do more often during meetings? I'm just cooking, just like cutting vegetables. Yeah. I just walk around with my laptop. Yeah, so that's what I tend to do. Look, as far as much as I'm I'm a crypto native more than a games native, and I strongly believe in this the Web3 tech stack and how we can positively impact the future of games. I do feel like that is probably nothing compared to everything that AI is going to touch when it comes to games. And you mentioned the pipeline and the process of building a game. I'm even thinking about what this means for like within games. And what are the exciting opportunities are when you have cheap AI that you can put inside of games.
I was talking to Brian about this, where historically you deprecate games because the live op costs outrun the revenue being generated by existing people. Mm-hmm. In a theoretical world where that never happens, you could have a library of games where there's content made for like the 4 people who still play the game, but not for anyone else.
Yeah.
And this is sort of there's a great game called Outside the Lines that has that type of play, and it's just like fanatical development by people. It's going to be interesting to see how we see that implementation happen, where it's like, hey, what happens when we now have games that can be developed that have infinite content? I got to a fairly, I sped run through New World. The MMO got to level 60, I think was its cap, and there was no end game content. I'm like, what the hell? So I churned very quickly. It was probably you should have been playing to begin with. So I was like, okay, I'm done. Right? You in theory should not have that problem, and I think it's really interesting. Similar to how some of the heuristics around the 2010s didn't apply to the 2010s. The heuristics that we have today in 2023 about that we've built over this last decade of working in gaming probably won't apply to some of these new things coming out, which is always awesome, right? Like the heuristic around having shelf space at Best Buy, like that being the most important distribution thing, that you need a publisher who has that shelf space. That was a common knowledge thing that GDC was about. You're coming here to pitch the publisher
to get shelf space.
Shelf space at Best Buy. Like that's what this conference was initially, in a lot of ways. Then Steam and app stores and whatnot, and like that's no longer. No one even thinks about that. Like who uses a publisher in some ways.
Yeah.
We'll see what this changes. It might just be that people are like, well, of course you have infinite content.
Mhm.
Like, what do you mean you don't have infinite assets to customization?
Yeah. It's insane. What do you guys think? Assuming that AI develops in such a way that we can literally create a game with a prompt,
Mhm.
any type of game, so it fully commoditizes the actual game development process. What does that world look like?
I think that, and this is not just true for gaming. I think it's true for any business. I don't think, at least, I don't think that the AIs will sort of replace all creative and design and sort of directorial jobs. Like, I think you still need an editor. You still need somebody to, like, who has taste, to ask, to generate the prompt in the first place, to sort of review all the outputs that are coming out of it. It's just that whereas today you may ask a bunch of people to do a bunch of work, like researching, putting together mocks, doing all this sort of, creating inputs for you to then like look at and decide or review. The AI will just make that much more efficient and be able to do it much faster, or enable people to do it faster. But it's not going to take away the sort of human element of decision making, at least for now. Maybe ask me again when the singularity hits, and then I don't know. But that's my take.
Gen AI and GAI are different.
Yeah.
Like, that's a huge branding issue where like people think Gen AI is generalized AI, and it's not. It's GAI is generalized AI. Gen AI is generative AI. What's interesting is, at least to me, what's really cool that we've seen historically is that I've never met a junior PM who enjoys listening to user feedback and
Right.
testing. Like, the act of doing so is painful. And so having like a GPT type system translate that is going to be super useful for them. Here's the flip side though. Like, Brian, do you think you develop taste by being in those meetings? Like is our taste formed by subjecting ourselves to these
to watching user testing?
Yeah, like seeing that constantly.
I think so. Yeah, there's some element of like, you have to pay the tuition somehow. You have to like go through that a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I think so.
And so if that's the case, then I'm really curious to your points, like, hey, what happens when someone replaces everything? Maybe that's actually not conducive to the growth of people.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when I was working on the Android version of Dots, just like the sheer pain of millisecond sound differences between the closing of the loop and the sound happening on Android, and being in the office at 11 p.m. in like a bit of crunch, being like, what the hell's wrong with this thing? And like, I remember hard coding a second delay, like a delay into the code to like get it to work on that device, and next morning realizing every Android device was different, and so would have to actually solve the problem. Right? I know, right? Yeah. And I remember that distinctly because that taught me a lot about hard coding solutions. And I was like, oh wow, I'm never gonna do that again. But I wonder, actively, to your point, it may be that we're not able to generate taste unless we go through those experiences. If that's the case, then in a lot of ways, despite having these shortcuts, we're going to talk about, hey, you could always use Photoshop to draw color. But one way to get better at understanding color theory is to paint by hand, right? And see the colors mix on a palette in order to do it. And that teaches you the theory that allows you to then leverage Photoshop. And perhaps it's going to be similar in Gen AI.
Okay, counter argument, playing the devil's advocate here. Isn't taste inferior to data? By which I mean that, right? You by talking to people, you learn things. But if you can infinitely generate and super fast iterate, and you can like,
actually put it out there.
Just put it out there, and just like have like millions of small A/B tests, and in that way actually like decide what the hell taste is.
It's an interesting question.
Yeah.
I don't know the answer. Is the answer. Like, I don't know. I've tried that and it hasn't worked, but that might just be a limitation of the number of categories I was testing, right? Like, we've tried to balance games with data a lot. And it's really hard because like it's just it's one of those things where you do it and you play and you're like, this is not fun. And everyone says, no, this is clearly not fun. Any human who had seen this would have been like, this is not fun.
Yeah.
But like the data is like, well, that's what's supposed to happen. Right. Yeah. And like that just might be a limitation of the model. Or it could also just be a limitation of the inputs we're giving it.
Also, I do think there is some sort of, even, we test things all the time and we look at data, but like we also have some intuition. There's some sort of Bayesian reasoning about the data, because sometimes your data is wrong. Your logging is broken in some way. Your data's wrong, and then the AI won't know that, and so it's just going to be, oh, here's the data. Okay, let's keep going in this direction. But as a human, you're sort of like, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why? How could this version possibly be better?
Gen AI right now can write code. Like ChatGPT for GPT-4 in particular can write really good code. But I highly recommend people who are computer science backgrounded read the code, because it will work. It may not work the way you want it to. And if you have a computer science degree or a background, you can read the code base and be like, oh, wait, okay, here's something that's wrong about this. But like, you wouldn't notice that if you were ignorant to that. And it may manifest in the future in some type of race condition. Yeah. Right? It might manifest in the future to some type of bug that's undebuggable because you no longer have it. This is sort of a related but funny story, which is our head of engineering is a guy named Bruce Hill, who worked on The Sims for like a decade plus ago. And he was telling me that he went to a talk and met some of the new, younger 20-something employees working in The Sims 4, and they're like, oh, you're B. Hill. We call you the Ancients. Like, your code base is the structure in which we like build the new things on, and we don't touch it. It's something that we don't understand because we didn't write it.
Like Moses brought it down.
Yeah,
tablets.
It's the basis. First of all, it makes it feel old, which is hilarious. But I think the second point, which is if it's him having written the code, he can then make changes and make adjustments because he understands the philosophical backing of it. One of the biggest concerns that, to your counter argument about what data helps, like if you don't know what you're inputting and outputting, and LLMs by definition, and reinforcement learning by definition, you're not supposed to know what goes in the black box and comes out. It is hard to debug. It is hard to debug. It's hard to make changes. And inevitably, you come up with a situation, you're like, this is code by the ancients. Why did you do it that way? Honestly, I was just really bored that day. That'd be interesting to have like incredibly strict typesetting for this for like one thing.
Yeah, let's see. I feel like from what I've noticed, I didn't see that many AI companies on the floor at GDC.
Well, they had a book an event next year.
Yeah. That's actually a great example of data failing, as an aside. Like, not saying that your data is bad, but like, if you were to judge Gen AI's penetration at this event purely based on number of booths, where the booth deadline was back in like March of last year, then your conclusion would be like, Web3 must have just hit the speed in 23, and I think that's one of the like weaknesses of a lot of these data models. It's like, because you are an investor in the space and you're seeing the outputs, but if you were to go purely based on that, you would be like, oh wow, it's all Web3.
How do you think this gets influenced by like broader market dynamics around VC today?
Holy moly, where do you want to start? Do you want to start with treasuries? Do you want to start with SVB?
Let's start with SVB. I don't think we actually discussed that yet.
Oh, you haven't discussed SVB on the podcast yet?
Not yet.
See, I'm still waiting for my ChatGPT to ingest the previous episodes and send me the write-up.
You can't be bothered to listen to them.
I mean, the impact is pretty large. I think startups are going to be hurt the most. Like, it's probably too early for them to realize, but one thing that people who are both even people who are VCs but too junior to see the process don't know is when you write a term sheet, money has to be wired from one account to another. But most VCs don't keep 100% of their fund in a bank account. They do capital calls, right? So we pull the money in. Great advice to founders is like the money's not yours until it hits your bank account. And so as a result, like the meta nowadays is like we wire immediately as soon as we sign the term sheet, right? Who do you think was providing that liquidity? Right? It was actually like SVB. Like SVB was like the lender of first resort who recognized that you have capital commitments and that could like bridge that along. Cost of capital is going to go up and the implementation is going to be pretty massive. Like you may see a lot of companies failing because there's zero interest rate phenomena, I suppose.
I don't know. I defer to you guys on this. You're the VCs.
Yeah.
I'm an interested observer, but
good. I'm curious to understand, and I don't think we've ever seen this, but a truly adversive funding climate, how much that impacts the innovation at the seed round level that people are raising for.
It typically doesn't affect seed rounds.
My assumption was like seed is fine.
Mhm.
Yeah. Seed is generally fine because seed has still the like if you have to beat 6% treasuries in terms of return profile, seed bets will. Not all of them, but the ones that do will definitely beat that, right? And so seed bets are typically fine.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a function of down round things and downstream effects, right? Like if you showcase an Unreal 5 game this past week, are you going to give a raise against that? Well, metric wise, you have none, so probably not. That's going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What I think is also interesting, just in the entire financial bit, is like what is going to happen with Web3 gaming, right? If we don't have 100 million users like that people are asking for, like what is the use case? Like Brian, have you seen anything that's interesting?
Actually, I was going to ask you guys because I feel like I have a bunch of friends. I'm a Web3 believer also, but I've been asking people at GDC this year, like, okay, look, I get the true digital ownership, like I get those arguments for it, but what are there other like sort of genuinely unique use cases that Web3 is providing? And I, as a sort of like long-term believer, I can sort of picture that in the future there will be something. We're definitely going to find something, but I like struggle to sort of like connect the dots all the way there. And it's almost like it's like a faith-based argument that we're going to figure something out. But
that's weird because Brian, you're the one who like put me on toward the idea of targeting, right?
That's true. That is one thing that I do. I do think user acquisition is interesting and like a unique thing you can do in Web3, like in the sense that let's say you wanted to build a new MMO, you want to go target people who are like really, really into WoW or into RuneScape, or whatever. You can't really do that, right? Like you can't go to Blizzard and be like, please give me like the email addresses of your best players, right? But on Web3, like I can look on chain, I can say, okay, like this person has spent a lot of money in Axie, or this person has like a Bored Ape, and those are people that we would want to play our game. And if they come, we'll give you some assets or map your assets to our existing, to our items so that you have a head start, right? So I think the user acquisition angle is quite interesting and actually genuinely unique. But I'm curious, like if you've seen any other or heard of any other sort of, like truly unique uses for it.
For what it's worth, like that's like an N+1 thing, what you just described, where it's like I would imagine most people haven't thought about that. Right? Like but that is huge. That's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this earlier, Nico, about how we're gonna see like guild versus guild combat at some point. Right? There is some really interesting mechanics there. The new thing I've been thinking about recently is I've always bashed the idea of making games for a small number of people. The idea of like 100-person or 1,000-person game in my heuristical world makes no sense. Like, why the hell would I ever spend my time and my company's time making a game that only 2,000 people will ever play? But the flip side is, here's an industry and space where you could actually, like, the best game to make is the spine space for like 2,000 people.
Yeah.
Like, how does that change how we think about games? I actually have not done this mental exercise, so I don't have an answer. But there are a lot of things that may only work for small groups of people.
Yeah, that's true. That is plausible that could unlock, more a bigger diversity of games. And same like Netflix. Like there's like they can make many more shows because they can sort of target exactly who it's for. Like it's possible. I think we're all waiting to see. I think we believe this is kind of what I was getting at with the whole precipice thing. That we're going to start finding out, but we're waiting to see whether or not the LTV curves really will be different for these Web3 games. Like I think everyone's sort of thinking, okay, well, look, you can spend more than $100 at a time via IAP or $1,000 at a time, right? You can go and click, I would like to spend $20,000 on this monkey JPEG, right? And so will that actually change the LTV curves? And then does that then translate to, your ability to go into Web2 marketing and say, okay, actually my LTV is way higher. I can go outbid all of these mid-core games or whatever. Maybe, but we don't know.
But by the way, Brian, I think you touched upon another really big, like, it's funny because you have this base assumption that everyone understands it's about blockchain and Web3 already. But like, do you want to go into more about how hard it is to get whales to pay money on mobile?
Yeah, so actually, Harlan, one of the founders of FOGcast, tells this story, which is like, one of the top spenders in War Dragons. I don't remember how much he spent, like, $100,000, $1 million. I don't remember exactly. Huh. But and he basically called him one day, like got his email and like messaged him and talked to him, and because he just wanted to understand as a customer, like, wait, how is this person like the game so much, or whatever. He just loves the game, like loves collecting dragons, playing. But he spent it all. This was before Apple made the IAP changes. We literally spent that much money, like a single $100 IAP at a time. So you just imagine like how many times you had to go through the purchase flow to do that, right? Versus you go to OpenSea, like, okay, I'd like to bid 50 ETH on this monkey JPEG or whatever, right? So, it's the order, the amount of money you can spend and the speed at which you can spend it is dramatically different, which could make a difference.
It's a huge difference in poker, for example, right? Like, if you think about how funding accounts work in poker websites, it's very hard to move 50 grand. And so the player liquidity for like $1, $2 games where people are playing $200 at a time is very high. But it is hard finding action or people to play against at 500, 1,000 because no one just has $100,000. Like, it's just really hard for a variety of good legal reasons, right? Like, but to wire $100,000 or something. Whereas there are definitely, like this time last year, there were massive poker games at GDC for the Web3 community, where hundreds of thousands of dollars were changing hands through UST.
Yeah.
And it all went to...
Dude, yeah. Pre-Luna and Terra times, man.
It was a crazy time last year.
That's good, yeah. And by the way, to your point, this is what Gabe Layden always talks about. For him, in the games that he was building, it's Machine Zone. Like he had a bunch of these whales, and he knew that he could get way more out of them if they didn't have to do it $100 at a time.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, I think all of these. So I spent half of my time, as I said, thinking about what Web3 brings to games, and I think it's a bunch of tiny things, right? So like slightly higher LTVs. I also think that what I'm seeing right now is especially in the mobile and the more casual side is a lot of bigger mobile publishers are trying to they're spinning out their Web3 divisions and companies, and the idea there is to through ATT they're struggling keeping people or getting new people into their ecosystem, and now through Web3 either through a combination or one of the two of fungible and non-fungible tokens. The idea is, if a player, gets tired of one of our casual games, then through either an NFT or the fungible tokens that he earned by playing the game, he'll be, have a higher inclination of going to another one of our games. That's the thesis.
I gotta be honest with you, Nico. One of the reasons I like your podcast, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, the one reason I like your podcast, it's really easy to sound smart saying negative things. Saying I dislike Web3 or I dislike Gen AI for XYZ thing. It's super easy to sound smart. What's really value capturing and interesting and harder to do is figuring out, hey, in this design space, what is something that's positive? What's something that we can make things? With the exception of specific types of hedge fund traders who short things, the only value we capture as developers, founders, investors is finding things that work. No one ever pays me money to find things that don't work, right? Actually, well, occasionally I do esports consulting, so people do occasionally pay me to tell them what doesn't work. But for the most part, I think what's really cool about the Future of Gaming podcast and what's really cool about GDC is that it's a collection of people who are here to try to find something that works. Now, 99.9% of them will fail. That's for sure true, because that's gaming. But what's really fun about this conference, about your podcast, and about all of this stuff is if anyone figures it out, that's going to be awesome. It may be that the best implementation is a 4-player version of a Web3 game that's high fidelity. It can only run on 4090s, and people are loading hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time.
I'm ready.
And they only can interact with the game by using ChatGPT. Right? That is a possibility. It's unlikely, but it is a possibility. Yeah. And I think that's so cool and why I come to GDC every year.
I appreciate the kind words, Seb, really. And one of the things that I also try to do and stimulate is non-skeuomorphic thinking. Because that's something that I do see quite a lot where, we already discussed how it from at a very surface level makes sense to have, payment rails that don't inhibit you from spending more than $100 at a time. I think that these are marginal improvements. What I also want to encourage founders and builders to think about and experiment with is, what's a crazy thing that no one's thinking and no one's doing, right? What does this technology like at a fundamental level unlock? People know if you listen to this, like pretty much every other episode, I shill about on-chain games, right, where the full game and state lives
Like
on the blockchain.
Dark Forest. Or,
Exactly. Yeah. So that kind of stuff is something that I think is intellectually very interesting.
Yeah.
I think there's a very high chance that just for the like maybe next 10 years doesn't make sense and doesn't work out. But it's something that I'm keeping an eye on and I'm interested in. And you know, more and more I see companies that are doing like different things.
Yeah.
And I like to see that. And you know, I think it's always hard to predict what's going to be successful, and the only way I think we're going to be proving the hardcore Web3 haters wrong is just, you know, shoving a game under their nose and having them admit that, oh yeah, this is fun.
You have a strong understanding of base rates in that you are going after things that succeed maybe 1% at a time instead of 0.1% at a time, and it's easy to hate on that. It's easy to hate on it because 99% of the time in the multiversal versions of what you're pursuing, it never works out.
Yeah.
But again, that is the fun of doing these things. Like, we're not going to see innovation unless we see people pursuing that.
Yeah.
And it's really fun, especially here, like you get Brian with his experience and you with your experience and sort of the intermeshing of that at this event.
Mm-hmm. All right. So as a final question for you guys, we like to do bold predictions. So given we've now been a week at GDC, let it digest a little bit and give me a bold prediction about the next year in gaming. And maybe you can say, like, what do you think will be hot next year? Same question to you, Seb.
No, I know, but do I go first? Like, do you want to think? They're thinking.
Do you want to go first?
Here's a hot take. I think, and this is, I do think if you have a hot take, you should put your money where your mouth is. Like, saying that you're going to bet something's going to reach some price and not backing it up with your own money is just BS in my opinion.
Agreed.
I think, and I'm spending more time on this platform as a result, I think we're going to see more conversations around gaming on LinkedIn. This is like one of the like weird things I've been like, I think it's replacing Twitter for like, we're going to see some really interesting hot takes on. And so I'm going to show that for a bit. I do think I'm a big believer in LinkedIn as the future of like gaming discourse in a way that Twitter has been for the last decade. For GDC in particular, I would bet we're going to see a lot of Gen AI booths at GDC next year because they're buying them right now.
Yeah,
I was going to say this too. Is that a hot take? I don't know. I feel like I would.
It's a warm take.
Yeah, well, I would agree with you on that one. I don't think it's a very hot take for me, but yeah, I'm trying to think what else. I don't know. I mean, trying to think whether it will happen by GDC or not. I mean, I do think we're going to hit probably like we're going to see sort of like a extinction event in a lot of, you know, game companies and Web3 game companies that raised money in the last few years. Going to have to raise again. The environment's much worse. Whether that will happen by GDC or maybe just, you know, into GDC and into the 2024, like we'll see. But I do think, yeah, that's the sort of unease I feel about the being on the precipice.
Oh, I have a hot take then. You know how Reid Hoffman at Netflix said that he's not competing against Hulu, he's competing against Fortnite?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think next year we should be saying, we're also competing against Netflix. Like, I think it goes both ways. Like, there's only so much attention. And insofar as people have funded all these studios, there is only so much time that people can play video games. We're going to see people who don't think they're competitors are actually competitors. Like, no one thinks that Counter-Strike 2 and Candy Crush is a competitor. But at the deepest and darkest corners of attention, they're competitors. That's a hot take.
I like it. I also like the LinkedIn games. I'm ready for them.
I'm all for it.
Well, you're not saying there's going to be games on LinkedIn.
Oh, there could be.
Oh, there could be.
But no, I'm saying the discourse of
The
gaming
discourse
is going to be on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah, fantastic. Good. All right, where can people find you, Brian?
I'm on Twitter at bshih, BSHIH. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Hey, I literally just said we're gonna go on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I'm on
yeah,
LinkedIn.
yeah. Exactly.
No. Brian is shilling Twitter, so I'm on LinkedIn at Sebastian Parks, Sebastian Park.
All right. We will. That's where the all of the conversations will happen. So I guess we'll meet you there. So yeah, Brian, Seb, thank you so much for joining. This was great. Man, look at this background. We gotta go chill in the sun. Listener, thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed. If you did, let us know. Join the Discord, futureofgaming.wtf, and yeah, come to GDC next year so we can look at some Gen AI booths. It's gonna be fun. See you next week. Ciao.